Epilepsy. Let's talk about some causes, the CBD therapeutics that can help treat this disease, as well as some comorbidities that we can see along with epilepsy. First, we're going to look into some of the causes. The first cause we're going to delve into is extratemporal lobe circuits and temporal lobe epilepsy. The major findings of this paper construed that divergent convergent pathways in limbic epilepsy are actually a relation between the connections between cortical and subcortical areas of the brain. These areas tend to work together and cause multifocal spread of seizures. The medial dorsal nucleus of the thalamus is the likely structure that causes limbic epilepsy. The discovery of this target promotes the use of target therapeutics to more effectively treat the seizures, starting from a local point. Next, we're going to talk about the role of astrocytes in epilepsy. So astrocytes are known to regulate neuronal activity via its ability to receive and release a various amount of neurotransmitters. So essentially what's going on is that during seizures, there is an increase in intracellular potassium that is normally balanced by potassium uptake and spatial potassium buffering. What this picture is showing is that there is an abnormal KIR channel. And what is happening is that this is allowing the extracellular potassium levels to increase to a point where the neuronal tissue cannot handle it. This results in epileptic syndrome in the mesial temporal lobe in human and animal models. Next, we're going to look at an experimental study that discusses the relationships between astrocytes and absent epilepsy in rats. The experimental study serves to quantify glial fibrillary acidic proteins, or GFAPs, in the various subcortical regions. The researchers explain the main point of the paper is to test whether these GFAP proteins within astrocytes throughout neuronal tissue have a direct correlation with causing absent epilepsy. Absent epilepsy is where the affected individuals experience short periods of loss of attention. This is shown to initiate and spread in relation to both glutamate and GABA interactions within the cells. The GAERS group of rats was predisposed genetically to have absent epilepsy, and they also had the most amount of positive GFAP expression, signifying a separation between the GFAP positive regions versus regions where higher expressions were observed. This is going to support that theory that the subcortical and cortical regions act together to spread epileptic circuitry. Based on the results, we know that there is an increase in the number of GFP-positive astrocytes and protein expression in those genetically diagnosed with absent epilepsy. It has a direct relation with the GABA and glutamate release and how abnormal uptake can lead to seizure episodes. Next, we're going to take a look at the hippocampus and epilepsy findings from human tissues. This is where research takes a surgical approach. Their review emphasizes the benefits of understanding human epileptic activities through surgically obtained specimens that are not normally possible with in situ analysis. The researchers revealed how depolarizing GABA responses could open up seizure control with GABAergic drugs. Specifically, these drugs will play a vital role in the subiculum, where the interictal and ictal epileptic activities have been found. If you take a look at figure 3, we can see that this shows that there's intracellular and extracellulars of pyramidal cells hyperpolarized during interictal discharges. Essentially, what this is trying to convey is that there is still that connection between the cortical and subcortical areas of the brain that are involved in epileptic circuitry. Now that we've looked at some of the causes, let's go ahead and look at some CBD therapeutics. CBD reduces the number and severity of seizures. It is a common course of treatment for epilepsy. Let's take a look at phytocannabinoids and epilepsy and how they interact. THC is one of the most predominant components in cannabis, and a clinical trial assessed that a rat dorsal hippocampus had afferent stimulations when giving small to large dosage of THC that essentially decreased the susceptibility the rat had to seizures. CBD, which is another phytocannabinoid of marijuana, activates 5-HT1A receptors. These essentially inhibit serotonin and the uptake of adenosine within the brain. There's also a chain of receptors and chemicals released after this, but overall, it's going to reduce the oxidative damage to initiate a T cell response from our immune system that's going to go and spread and calm the networks in the epileptic syndrome. This is essentially making it act as an anticonvulsant. If you take a look at the graph, you can see that in the first column that 84% of people treated with CBD saw significant release in epileptic symptoms. Next, let's talk about cannabinoids and treatment-resistant epilepsy. This review over treatment-resistant epilepsy provided a compilation of studies that proved CBD is at least 50% effective in most clinical trials that are targeted towards treatment of resistant epileptic disorders. Treatment-resistant epilepsy comes from the inability to treat epileptic syndrome after 2 or more drug trials. There are multiple syndromes that stem from this TRE, but essentially the review supports the use and efficacy of CBD for treatment of TRE. Evidence supports the therapeutic use of cannabis and its ability to eliminate and relieve symptoms and improve the patient's quality of life. And it does this by acting as an anticonvulsant in the neuronal networks that are overexcitatory in epileptic syndrome. The pharmacology of cannabinoids in the treatment of epilepsy can be quite complex. The major results of this review paper presented the findings of how major cannabinoids can affect various receptors within the body that ultimately aid in minimizing convulsions seen in many types of epilepsy. Specifically, the mechanisms of delta-9 THCV and delta-9 THCA are not fully known but show similar pathways of a psychoactive drug similar to delta-9 THC. CBD is non-psychoactive and is common and serves as a blocker of endocannabinoid receptors. All of the listed molecules tend to show decreased bioavailability simply due to their lipophilic properties. This presents issues and challenges associated that may limit drug delivery. Because epilepsy is such a complex neurological disorder, it often is seen with comorbidity diseases. The number one associated comorbidity with epilepsy is depression. Let's take a look at the review, epilepsy, depression, and growth rate hormones. Essentially, what this article presents is a review of depression and the comorbidity it has with epilepsy. The main conclusion of the paper states that the growth hormone deficiency that is normal in childhood disorders can result in adulthood deficiency with serious consequences and impairments. The article specifically finds that the growth hormone deficiency in patients with epilepsy can actually heighten the concentrations of cortisol within their brain. Cortisol has also been proved to be elevated in those with epilepsy and have also been associated with adulthood depression. The paper serves to provide research into growth hormone replacement therapies that could possibly improve the quality of life for epilepsy-related depression. Managing epilepsy-associated depression is not necessarily an easy tactic. Let's take a look at SSRIs, which is our common antidepressants that we are given. Effective on acute SSRI treatment of serotonin levels depicted by this picture actually shows that it reduces the level of serotonin built up in the body over long periods of time. So how do we fix that? The key is tryptophan. Essentially, tryptophan's bioavailability has been determined as the key limiting factor for the synthesis of serotonin, and further therapeutic intervention should be aimed at increasing the delivery of tryptophan in the brain to serve as an effective management for symptoms of depression. Now let's take it a little closer to home and look at COVID-19's comorbidity with epilepsy. How does COVID-19 cause seizure and epilepsy in patients? So here's the potential mechanism that this paper has determined. The coronavirus infects the person and causes our blood-brain barrier to become unstable. This will then allow the brain to increase the number of cytokines present and causes inflammation. Inflammation will then cause an influx of ions, specifically potassium, that will incite neuronal hyperexcitability. This hyperexcitability will then onset seizures. COVID-19 can induce multi-system organ dysfunction that brings the body far from homeostasis and increases inflammation within the brain specifically. Now that we've delved into the causes of epilepsy, as well as CBD therapeutics, CBD therapeutics to treat the disorder, and comorbidities of other diseases associated with epilepsy, it's safe to say that I think we have a better understanding of what researchers need to be looking forward into treating epilepsy and maybe finding a cure permanently.